Here we are again. Thank goodness we get together and hear a writer read. And our writers reading today are Maryann Andersen and Ina Bray. And you know the routine. I say a line of the poem, and then you say a line of the poem, Paul's poem. Here we go. Write, write, write.
Write, write, write.
Until you get it right.
Until you get it right.
Then read aloud.
Then read aloud.
You'll draw a crowd.
You'll draw a crowd.
And bring us great delight.
And bring us great delight.
Hi, Maryann.
Hello.
Good to see you
Good
again.
seeing you.
And I like to look forward to what you're reading today. Earlier this week, I wrote an email to Maryann and Ina about early writing memories. What memories do you have of actually writing on a piece of paper? Was it in school? Was it in a journal? What early memories do you have, Maryann?
Well, I must have written in school. I don't recall it. But I know I was told by my teachers I should be a writer. And I said, no, it's too hard. I would never want to be a writer.
Oh.
And so I did get a university degree in communications, which has proven invaluable over the years because I settled on speech and theater at the time. And it was in midlife, actually, that I started to write, really started to write. I went to work in public relations.
Oh my.
And that necessarily involves writing.
Oh, absolutely.
But in the meantime, when our children were young, we lived across the country from my mother. And I was thinking, after your question, I wrote a lot about family life. And that was when letters were long and detailed.
Letters.
Right.
Oh.
But no, I never aspired to be a writer.
Well, you're a writer today, aren't you? What are you going to be reading for us,
Well,
Maryann?
I'm going to, I'll give you a little introduction. It's a book that we printed, and I'm not a published writer necessarily in books, but I'm reading today part of an afterword from a book we printed in 2020. An author writes an afterword when there is something they need to add to a book. In other words, they didn't get it all said the first time around.
Oh.
Consequently, my books all have a lot of afterwards.
Afterwards.
So
I
never
love that
quite
phrase,
get-
afterwards.
It's a good
phrase.
It's much better than appendix.
Yes.
So, but the book is called Conversations. And I'll explain. My son Peter is never without a tiny little recorder. 2 inches, 3 by 3 inches. He's a writer, and he uses this recorder to jot things down whenever he has an idea about a project.
Oh, wonderful.
So over a period of several years, we casually created conversations between the two of us, and we kept that up until, I think, 2013. And then it lay fallow, so to speak, and then 2020, we decided to put it in book form. And called it Conversations by Andersen and Andersen.
And what a wonderful title for a book.
It came up very naturally.
Yeah.
However, before the printing, I realized that something significant was happening right then that needed to be recorded. And I knew this, I'm reading this because I thought it out here. I knew this because looking at my own family's history, I had little knowledge of their experience with the flu epidemic in 1918. I know it sounds like it's going to be a jolly read. Anyway, I knew that a nurse had come to live with the family, but I wanted more information about that time. So I decided on this afterward to these conversations in this book that would inform interested family members 100 years hence about what was happening to us in the early part of the 21st century.
Oh my, Maryann.
So that's where we are.
That is going to be a rich, rich read today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Nancy. Shall I begin?
Yes.
This is an afterword to the book called Conversations. It was written on April 26, 2020. Since these interviews were completed several years ago in 2013, there have been many more interesting experiences in my life. On a negative note, we will never forget being in Xi'an, China on September 11th, 2001. As tourists, we were part of a talk tour and had just returned to our hotel from a dim sum dinner. The attendant on our floor said, "You should check your television. There's been an accident in America." As we watched, the second plane flew into the World Trade Center. I remember thinking of our grandchildren, knowing that the world would never be the same. In a state of disbelief, the next day, we journeyed to Chongqing and began a cruise down the Yangtze River to Wuhan. I remember Wuhan only as another huge Chinese city spread out along the banks of the Yangtze. So, beginning then in 2003, Bill and I had spent fall semesters at the Johns Hopkins Nanjing Center for Chinese Studies in Nanjing, and Bill taught U.S. constitutional law to Chinese students who were fluent in English, and I wandered about the city. We made great friends at the university and remain in touch with many. Let's see, where are we here? In 2011, Bill retired, and we made the decision to sell our home at 45 years and move to Horizon House, a retirement community in the heart of downtown Seattle. The move has been enriching beyond our expectations. The community is a vibrant one made up of highly educated professionals, artists, business leaders, public servants, and other accomplished retirees. We've made new friends and become reacquainted with people we had lost touch with over the years. We've taken advantage of Seattle's flourishing downtown by regularly attending Seattle Opera musicals at the Fifth Avenue Theater and lectures at nearby Town Hall. 3 years ago, Shirley, my sister, moved from California to live at Horizon House, and my sister Jan and her husband Bill moved here from their home in North Seattle. It is interesting that the three of us, born in farm country in northwest Missouri 8 years ago, and whose lives have been very diverse all over many directions, are again living under the same roof. And then I talk about my family, which I will not talk about today, but where the children are, grandchildren are, and they're graduating from school and all of that. Fortunately, our friends have been spared from contracting COVID-19, but no one is spared its effects. It is as if the smothering blanket was slowly, then quickly spread over our land. No one yet understands the virus, so restrictions exist to prevent its spread. Practice social distancing, stand at least 6 feet apart, wear a mask when in public, wash hands often and thoroughly, no large gatherings, theater, sports events, parks, travel, even smaller gatherings. It was Zoom for our family Easter gathering and at book club discussions, residence council, many of Bill's committee meetings and music meetings. At Horizon House, since the first part of March, I'm writing this now in May 2020, we have not been allowed visitors. After being quarantined to our apartments for 3 weeks, we are now allowed outside for walks. That's hard to remember, but it happened.
My, yes.
Our temperature is checked when we return. Only 2 people are allowed in the elevator. Dining room is closed with meals delivered if we order. Many restaurants deliver in an effort to keep employees working. All mail, packages, newspapers, etc. are delivered to their apartments. We order items delivered from grocery stores. I have not minded being in the apartment because my life is centered here anyway. It is harder for Bill, who is connected to so much of Horizon House music, intellectual and administrative life. Looking at the bigger picture here, and then again I talk about grandchildren and they're starting out their professional lives, they're all in their 20s.
Okay.
But then I look at the bigger picture. We have a dear friend who was a student of Bill's in Nanjing, China, and who's now a senior labor lawyer for a high-tech company in China. You know the company, but I can't mention its name. She works in Shanghai and commutes to Suzhou, where she lives with her parents and her 9-year-old daughter. It appears that COVID-19 started in China, perhaps in Wuhan, at the end of 2019. Our friend had just spent 6 months at company headquarters in the US in the Silicon Valley. She is often there on business and has visited us in Seattle on 3 different occasions. I will quote from some of her emails. December 23rd, 2019.
Okay.
This was before. She said, I miss you in Seattle. I miss Silicon Valley, the center of the universe, and all my hiking and explorations there. This world is of so much fun, and let us enjoy life.
Oh my.
And then 6 weeks later, on February 5th, 2020, she wrote, just after 1 week, China is completely different. Currently, we are confined at home. Technically, we can still go outside, but the government urges everybody to stay at home to avoid being infected. And all the stores are shut. Fortunately, life is not that bad in Shanghai and Suzhou. People stay at home most of the time, and transportation has been reduced significantly. The impact on the company is huge. All our supply chain is in China, and since many cities are locked down and the factories have been closed for an extended period after Chinese New Year holiday, we are facing manufacturing suspension, which means U.S. customers may not be able to get the products they want. We also have around 10,000 employees in China, and we need to take care of them. She was the head of labor law. Yeah. I have been working day and night for almost 2 weeks. I am tired, but I know this is a critical time and try to do my best. My mom is responsible for cooking and taking care of my daughter. I am working sometimes running in the garden of our community. Suzhou is a city of gardens, and so her community is a nice place to run. And my dad looking after my daughter's study. I hope things are better soon and back to normal. And that's the end of that quote. It is interesting to notice in retrospect that I had no notion of the gravity of our friend's situation. What did she mean by China's changing in just 1 week?
1 week.
But I would soon understand. However, political leaders in the U.S. remained blind to the China situation. On February 26 and 28, Bill spoke to retirement communities in Redmond and Issaquah on the topics of abortion and the Constitution, and I accompanied him to those talks primarily so I could read the GPS to get us to where we were going. President Trump had acknowledged the Wuhan virus, but declared it no threat to the United States. 2 weeks later, on March 12th, we went to the east side on the 28th of February. On March 12th, Horizon House had a suspected case of virus who tested negative. But Horizon House management grew concerned, and security measures and screening were implemented, and services were curtailed. On March 14th, our friend writes, "I thought as long as our Chinese people could overcome this disaster, it will be fine, and the world could go back to the norm. But things never develop as we expect." End of quote.
Wisdom.
Wisdom, yeah, she's a wise young woman. She's probably about 30. I do not have the exact date, but the first case identified in the U.S. was a 30-year-old man who had visited Wuhan and returned to Snohomish County, north of Seattle. It is now believed that earlier cases existed in California, but were not identified. President Trump continued to deny the seriousness of the situation. The president held daily briefings, but unfortunately his personality had been revealed, and his aides are suggesting that the briefings be discontinued. He has withdrawn financial aid to the World Health Organization,
That's right.
WHO, and his popularity polls are declining, a concern for the election coming in November. The press has been ruthless. The country has relied on medical expert Dr. Anthony Fauci. Unfortunately, little is known about COVID. Its symptoms and severity vary. Chills, fever, cough, loss of taste and smell, pneumonia, inability to breathe. Young people are dying because of blood clots and the resulting strokes. It is thought that many people are asymptomatic, however. Through all this, hospitals and their staffs have been overwhelmed. Long hours, limited equipment. Labs are frantically working on developing vaccine. Experts warn that widespread testing and contact tracing are necessary for eradication. My sister Shirley's son in San Francisco is a physician, married to a physician, and so they spent a good year in the emergency room. Anyway, do you have, so again, Carrie writes, do you have masks? And do you need masks? I know Americans do not like wearing masks, but it does help. Or at least it gives you some peace of mind if you need to stay in public places or hospital for a while. If you need and cannot get into the United States, I can find a way to post some to you, though it may take 1 or 2 weeks.
Oh my.
Isn't that nice?
Oh, generous.
Very generous. It will be a disruptive, intensive time, Maryann, but you and Professor definitely have more wisdom than me to handle it, as you have gone through all those difficulties in your life. When I was locked in my apartment, I thought of all my many happy moments when I was in the U.S. I feel so lucky I was able to spend a peaceful and cheerful time last year. I am very busy, but I still go to my office so can be more efficient and follow regular pace of life. My daughter is still home having online study course. She's doing fine, though it is definitely not best situation for kids. I feel so sorry for our kids. How often have we heard that comment?
How many times?
So the end of that quote. I'm nearing the end here, but I just wanted to say that I offer our friends' words to illustrate a personal view from China on the effects of the virus. In this case, the U.S. has not risen to its usual leadership role in the world. And within our country, there is so much political finger-pointing. We're in for a bumpy summer politically. Protests some protesters, some carrying guns, some at state capitals to object to governor-ordered lockdowns, are in many cities. The future of our economy is uncertain. Many are unemployed, small businesses and large companies fail, with online businesses doing best. In the meantime, the virus itself remains a mystery. People with the virus die of mysterious causes. Experts warn that even though the number of new cases is decreasing, new spikes will happen if restrictions lift too soon. Our medical people are considered heroes. Researchers are desperate in their search for solutions. Policymakers, as well as influential leaders like Bill Gates, view COVID as the world crisis it is. And as I try to finish this afterward, in 2020, the national news is bad. The president has ignored objections by the mayors of numerous major cities and the governor of our state, and sent in troops to settle protests. COVID-19 cases rise, and tension with China increases. This came from our friend in Shanghai. Am I okay with my time?
Okay.
Was received on July 20th. I'm having a hard time to start this email, so many things happening. First, please let me know you and Professor are doing well. I know there is a spike in the U.S. Second, U.S.-China relations is a big problem right now. And every day we are struggling how to do business in such countries. It is a difficult time. Hang in there, Maryann. Let us still hold the hope firmly and passionately. The hurricane is here but both countries matter to us. Take care. And that's a close to that quote. In our family, adjustments are made and life goes on. These half-dozen grandchildren are all in there trying to start their careers. I close by saying I was born into a depression 85 years ago, as many of us were. We may be headed toward another, but at the risk of sounding like Dr. Seuss, because of the people I've known, the places I've been, and the family I was given, I truly have a fortunate and wonderful life.
Oh, Maryann, thank you so much. This was surely a gift. The Chinese voice and your voice, it was a gift of a reading and a writing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure to revisit it all.
Oh. Ina, good to see you again, and welcome, welcome. And Ina, when I look at you, I think of all the doors you have opened for this community. You have opened us to think outside. So I'm looking forward to what you're reading today, but do start with early writing memories, if you might.
I don't know if you want to hear them. My early memories, because when I started school, I barely spoke German. So I had to write in German, a language I didn't know.
Oh.
So the memories were not particularly, pleasant.
Yeah.
Not only that, because we were living, and I will read something about it. We were living in an area at the time during the Second World War when we as foreigners were considered subhuman. Therefore, we could never write anything or do anything or learn anything above just being average, if that.
Oh my.
So even if I wrote something, I never had anything better than a C as long as the Second World War continued. So, memories, well, I wrote, but then never expecting any praise.
Yeah.
At least they passed me, at least that much I accomplished. So, yeah, those memories, it wasn't until I came to the United States, until I came to the American system of education, where you get encouraged, where even a little bit of success is recognized and you get a pat on the back. That was fabulous. And that's when I began to write, not really write, but when I began to realize that my term papers, yeah, they were acceptable.
Oh, good.
So that was, yeah, a different experience.
A different experience in a language you didn't know.
No,
that is a hard way to start, but you've turned into a writer, that's for sure.
Well, in English.
In English.
German,
okay.
that's left behind. Lithuanian, that's, yeah, I rarely use it.
Okay.
But yeah, but this is it.
This is it.
This is it.
Good.
All right, my story today is going to be so different from what Maryann wrote. It's my childhood, my early childhood. And again, part of what you're asking, it's during that time period, during the time when there were no friends, when I was, again, this outsider. And so when you're an outsider, and you know, we humans need friends, so it's amazing where we find them. And so this is my story of my friend Bujanus. Is it possible to become friends with a gander, to anthropomorphize this feathered creature? War can be a catalyst for wondrous relationships. So now I'll give you some historic context. In March of 1939, Nazi Germany annexed our Lithuanian corner of the world, a sliver of land along the Baltic Sea, and overnight our surroundings became German. Hitler's plan to invade Russia needed an ice-free port, and Klaipėda, the town where I was born, where we lived, provided just that. When Hitler moved the border east, I was barely 4 years old. For us, the local Lithuanian population, this created a painful tectonic shift on our lives. To make room for Germans waiting to be relocated from Western Germany, most of the local Lithuanians were forced to leave. Leave to Lithuania, leave to whatever country would accept us. Property was confiscated, our livelihood vanished, our language forbidden. The few who were allowed to remain, my family among them, became enemies of the German state. Undesirables, we were termed, and that is how we were treated. And as Germany prepared for war, food became a major concern. Food rationing affected everybody, even in Germany. But the allotment to us non-Germans was even further reduced. My parents had built our home outside the city of Klaipėda, now Malmö in German. It was part of a resort near the Baltic Sea, on the edge of an endless forest, and in a somewhat rural area. That location provided certain possibilities to grow our own food. And even though my mother was a city girl, she had grown up in Moscow, she decided she would try raising geese. She already had some experience with hens in our backyard, so well, geese should be no problem. For her, that is. So one warm spring day, she came back from the farmer's market with 7 cheeping goslings in her basket, each the size of a large potato on stilts, a handful of golden fluff. Boy goslings? Girl goslings? Who knew? Time would tell. As the weeks went by and the goslings grew, little white feathers began to replace the golden fuzz. And after some more weeks, 6 full-grown white geese and 1 gray and white gander were strutting around the backyard. The white geese turned out to be female, and the gray and white one, a very male alpha gander who dominated a most docile harem. To my great chagrin, the gander decided that I represented a threat to his geese. So no sooner would I appear in the yard than he would honk, making a terrific racket, spread his wings, and nip me wherever he could reach me. By then, I was some 7, 8 years old and always wearing a dress, so there was lots of leg surface to pinch, resulting in some very painful blue bruises. Just running away was useless. With his outstretched wings, instantly he was practically airborne, and I had absolutely no chance of evading him. And I had chores, which meant I had to cross the yard, get to the shed to get fodder for the hens and the geese, herd all these feathered creatures into the chicken coop for the night. In the morning, release them. The hens laid eggs, which I had to collect, and also hang up laundry, and later take it down. Harvest radishes, lettuce, tomatoes, or gooseberries from the enclosed garden. This darting across the yard to the designated area became more and more of a panicky sprint, so usually I came armed with a stick or two. At times I did succeed when something diverted the gander's attention, but too often he would get me. One day, when escape again became impossible, I scampered up a ladder that had been left leaning against the shed. Desperately, I scurried up several rungs, and to my utter surprise, the gander didn't follow me. He didn't even make an attempt, but stayed on the bottom rung and just honked in anger and frustration. I gleefully watched him from my safe perch. After a while, he must have tired of making such a racket, and so he just stared at me. I stared back. Minutes and more minutes passed. Finally, both of us must have gotten bored with the standoff, and I started talking to him.
Oh,
I wish I could remember what persuasive words I used. As my feet got more and more tired of holding on to the rung, and my tone of voice began to lose its annoyance and became softer, slowly the gander began to lower his head and waved it slightly back and forth. His sounds turned into monosyllabic conversation, almost the same tone as mine. How long this dialogue continued, I can't remember, but I do remember my legs beginning to shake from my uncomfortable balancing act. After quite some time, ever so slowly and hesitatingly, and still perched up on the ladder, I decided to hold out my hand to him. Would he lunge at it? Neither one of us could have fully trusted the other, but then neither one of us retreated. Almost imperceptibly, I moved toward him, and ever so tenuously, he allowed me to touch his velvety back. What an unforgettable moment. I held back tears of joy. But now what? Will this armistice hold? Slowly I came down to the ground. Nothing happened. No nipping, no honking, no lunging at me. Nothing but gentle goose noises, as if to tell me that all is well. Had his wild aggression really turned into tenderness? As the days turned into weeks, amazingly, this big bird, this stupid goose, or in this case, gander, developed into a most lovable and trusted companion, a friend that I so desperately needed at that time in my life. My Lithuanian playmates were long gone. To the German kids, I was the face of the enemy, the whipping boy. Seldom would the girls include me in the tea parties they served to their dolls. Some did. For hide and seek, I was rarely chosen. The train ride, or later the walk to school, usually was a lonesome trek, but that was easier than the relentless bullying. The sandbox in our backyard, with a high water level, provided never-ending building material for castles and canals, stood mostly empty except for me and my much younger brother Alex. Oh, but wondrous peace can precipitate, even if it's only with a gander. Now, whenever I appeared in the backyard, my gander, I named him Guzhinas, after the sounds that he was making, would almost fly to me, and he would greet me. His snow-white harem was never far behind, and like a Greek chorus with a gentle cha-cha-cha-cha-chatter, they would soon join in the welcoming. Guzhinas would hear from me about the day's events, the hurts, and the good parts. He was a most sympathetic listener, head bobbing. Sandbox activities were special to him. His orange beak would try out the little cakes that I had lined up on the edge of the box. I had baked them just for him. His ever-busy beak would look for the fish in the waters of the moats that I had built. A particularly favorite game for him was to climb up on my back as I was on my hands and knees digging those canals. And once he felt stable on his perch, he would look for buttons on my clothes. His soft, warm neck would reach around me, searching and searching, tickling me, then push his feet under my hair, invariably pulling out some strands. Or if luck was with him, he would discover a row of buttons on the back of my dress, and nibble, nibble, one by one, he would get them all until he had them all off. Bonded to his harem, to the hens, and now to me, he appointed himself guard dog of our yard, very much to the detriment of our visitors or neighborhood kids who occasionally would come by. His little beak continued to be daunting and painful weapon, and a painful weapon. Yet Guzhinas knew where the boundaries of his domain lay. A sandy alley bordered our property beyond our gate, and occasionally he and his geese would go out exploring. A watery ditch at one end of the alley always provided some delicacies, worms, slugs, and frequently that was the destination. If one followed that alley to the right, it ended in a T. At that point, if one turned left, the path then led to the train station. Amazingly, the geese seemed to know when we had gone to the city. We usually returned on the 2 o'clock train. It was at this T intersection that Guzhinas and harem would position themselves, waiting and watching intently who was approaching. They all remained in formation, Guzhinas in front, all heads held high, beaks slightly raised, on guard, but not threatening. But as soon as they spotted us at the end of the alley and no one obstructed their passage, it was as if a firecracker had exploded. Instantly, Guzhinas' trumpet blared recognition, wings spread, little orange feet set in motion, and with a chorus of honking, this cloud of white flew towards us. For some 100 feet, this wild exuberance of our flock of geese filled the air. And then, as suddenly as they had burst forth, they stopped, rearranged their wings, changed their direction, and with a gentle chattering, guided us home. This feathered celebration never failed to amuse us and amaze fellow travelers or neighbors. No other welcome home moments in my life ever came close to being as dramatic and absolutely heartfelt as these greetings by my beloved Guzhinas. Over the seasons, the size of the harem waxed and waned as Christmas or other events required special dinners. Goslings hatched, and new goose families established themselves, always under the tutelage of Guzhinas. But war leaves very few unaffected, and in the summer of 1944, the Soviet front was approaching rapidly. Think Ukraine today. To escape Russian terror and brutality, there was no choice but to flee to the west, taking only what we could carry. Luckily, with enormous difficulty, my mother had succeeded in arranging for a crate of some of our belongings to be shipped to friends in the western part of Germany. winter clothing, blankets, my stuffed doggy, some household items such as our sterling silverware. If possible, we would pick up these vital necessities once we had landed somewhere. And so, late in the afternoon, on a summery August day, just hours before our own exodus the following morning, a truck arrived. All kinds of crates were already stacked on its flatbed with just enough room left for our wooden box. The commotion in our house was enormous. My father, Yodas Bartolus, had already been taken to the front to dig trenches. So he was gone. He was gone to the Eastern Front, the Russian front. We didn't know whether he was alive or dead. It was my mother who now was packing and preparing and giving orders. Several families had arrived from Lithuania, getting ready to flee with us. My hands were full, as I was the designated babysitter for all the smaller children, and they were constantly underfoot. Visible tension hung in the air. For some days already, the hens were gone, but to where, I didn't know. And now I wondered what would happen to my geese. With rising apprehension, I kept asking, but nobody would tell me. Nobody. The sun began to sink behind the forest. The time had come for the truck to take off. As all kinds of strangers were milling about, kids running this way and that, I wanted to see the final preparations outside. I got away, ran out the front door, saw the truck, and my hand flew to my mouth to hold back a scream. There on the crates lay the bodies of my geese, all in a row, as if on display. Lifeless bodies on the crates, lifeless bloody heads hanging over the edges. Oh my goodness, my dear, my only trusted friend. I still remember being convulsed with sobs, even after the truck had long disappeared down the dusty road into the early evening shadows. After that, it no longer mattered where the next morning would take us and what would happen to us then. It no longer mattered what would become of our house, the home that once had rung with joy, laughter, and music, and then had brought so much anguish in the last years, the last moments. Boom, boom, boom. The cannons thundered in the distance. It no longer mattered.
Nina, see, you open doors and share your experience with us, and we so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness, what an ending.
Please remember that this is Ukraine today.
Yes.
This is what little girls and boys and grandmothers go through today. The same Russians, the same bombing, the same explosions, the same brutality.
Oh, thank you so much for reading.
Thank you.
Come back again and again. And Maryann, come back again and again.